I'm going to tell you a little story about my dad. My dad lives in Littleton, North Carolina. It's a little town in North Carolina. It's in the rural South. My parents divorced when I was 3, and he traveled back and forth every weekend for 2 hours to pick me up and to drop me off. He was never a minute late. He's the only man on either side of my family that cooks, and he raised 2 girls that are strong and ambitious women. My sister graduated valedictorian from NC State, and she's now in her 2nd year of medical school. And I'm here. My dad voted for Trump. And so during the 2016 election, when the Pussygate story broke, and we at Hollaback were getting all of these phone calls from all of these different reporters, left, right, front, and center, I texted my sister and I just said, Dad's not still voting for Trump, is he? And she said, yes, he is. And it was in that moment, long before the election results rolled in, that I realized that maybe the impact of the trauma of this campaign, the trauma of this moment, wasn't going to end when the campaign ended and Hillary inevitably won. Because maybe this wasn't just about politics, and maybe this wasn't just about our next president. Maybe those were actually just symptoms. Maybe this was about us. My dad voted for Trump enthusiastically. I voted for Hillary enthusiastically. It's the truth, but it's also a representation of the distance between us. Now, don't get me wrong. I love my dad so much. There has never been a moment in my life where I questioned his love for me. But there are moments when this relationship feels almost impossible. Does anybody out there have a similar relationship like this? Yeah. 15% of people in this country no longer speak to family members as a result of the 2016 election. Yeah. We're a nation grieving what we've lost. We're a nation grieving each other. But we're also a nation that never really had each other to begin with. The divisions have always been here. Now they're just in technicolor. My friend Jen Bailey says it's apocalyptic times, and not apocalypse in like the apocalypse now sense of the word, but apocalypse in the original root of the word, which actually means to uncover. And now that we have all seen who we are in this country, it's something that we can't actually unsee. For many of us, including at different moments, probably every single person in this room, we've already seen a lot. When I was 18 and my hair was still its natural color, I moved from the South to big old New York City to go to school. And on my first day of classes, I'm walking through Washington Square Park. I went to NYU. And this guy came up to me and he said, "Hello, baby." And I said, "Hello." And he responded, "I want to fuck the shit out of you." Yeah. Don't act surprised. I know this has happened to you all. I stoically pretended like it didn't happen, like it was just one person in this sea of millions. But it happened, and it happened again, and it happened again, and 2, 3, sometimes 4 times a day. I would get these really lewd comments. Somebody would say something totally nasty to me. They would say, "I'd rape her," or "Are you a girl or a boy?" And I never talked about street harassment before I started Hollaback. One day, my friend Kimberly was sitting across from me, and she said, "You know what? When I get harassed, I don't know if it's because I'm a woman, because I'm gay, or because I'm Latina." In that moment, it wasn't just her words, right? There was the vibration in her voice, the resonance of her heart, the depth and breadth of her pain that I felt. Because look, I'm a good feminist. I've read Audre Lorde and Judith Butler and all those amazing people that Wade just quoted. I have an undergraduate degree in the intersections of race, gender, sexuality, and class. I learned how to say it really fast. But the practice of caring for others is actually not a matter of the head. It's a matter of the heart. You can't just read yourself into wanting to truly and deeply see other people, care for other people. And my brain knew very, very well that the cost for being Black or being gay or being trans or being an immigrant or being Muslim or being disabled was so much higher than the cost for being a white woman in this world. But it took a story, not an academic book, until I was ready to throw down and start an organization. The more stories I heard, the more stories Hollaback collected, the more visible this problem started to become. I want to bring a couple of those stories into this conversation. This is Paige Lily Motlow Phillips. She was walking down the street. She ignored unwanted advances, and she was run over by a moped. She had internal bleeding, and he was let go by the police within 2 hours. This is Mary Unique Spears. She was leaving a funeral with her 3 children. A man came up to her, asked her for a number. She politely declined. He pulled out a gun and shot her dead in front of her kids. Through story, the costs we pay to be who we are start to become scripted onto our hearts. And as you hear these stories, and these stories start to script onto yours, I want to take a second to breathe and remember these women, the women sitting beside you, yourself. What divides us? Because we cannot truly see what connects us until we are truly willing to see each other's pain. We've collected about 11,000 stories of harassment on Hollaback's site. We usually get about 100 a month. Over the past year, that's doubled. So how many folks here have ever been grabbed by the pussy? Or if you even know somebody who's been grabbed by the pussy? For me, for many of us, this statement, grab them by the pussy, is real. It's really real. And it's a story that I've heard from hundreds of women, trans men, and gender nonconforming folks from all over the world. But I think that for most of America, this story actually wasn't real. It was easy to dismiss because they never really heard of it happening, or maybe it happened to them and they thought they were the only ones. And so Hollaback entered into this project called the People's Supper with that idea, because we had a sense of how stories shape empathy, of how they build communities, and we've learned what it looks like to live through trauma at an inescapable scale. But what I didn't know a lot about was grief. And so even before the election happened, and I knew that our country was aching, I started to reach out to somebody who did. My friend Lennon Flowers, who's the executive director of the Dinner Party, which is a community of 20 and 30-somethings processing traumatic loss. And we called Jen Bailey, the executive director of the Faith Matters Network, which is a faith-rooted social justice leadership incubator working in the South and led by people of color. And this hopeful experiment was born with the 3 of us. We had this idea that we could bring people together, that we could make sense of ourselves in a world that hated us, that we could maybe survive. But we also wanted more. We wanted to have conversations that bridge difference, like the space between my dad and me. And we wanted to do it over this thing that everyone loves, food. So we gave folks resources and training so they could host a dinner on their home, and we trained them and showed them how to do it. We initially called it 100 Days, 100 Dinners because we couldn't imagine the world after 100 days of a Trump presidency. But then it kind of just kept going, and so we thought maybe we should too. And now it's called the People's Supper. Here's the thing. The number one indicator for somebody who voted for Trump is agreement with the following phrase: people like me don't have any say. I'm going to repeat that again. People like me don't have any say. Now, you guys all know the demographics of who voted for Trump. So just as you hear that, right, there's probably some emotions coming up. Maybe some confusion. Anybody feeling some confusion about that, right? Maybe a little outrage in the room. All right, let's take a second to feel that. Now, let's think for a second, has there ever been a moment where you felt like you didn't have any say? Yeah, me too. My dad obviously feels that way a lot. He lives in the 3rd poorest county in the United States. He calls politicians a bunch of crooks. When the power lines go down in his neighborhood, they are down for days. And we're living in what's been called the age of loneliness. We're more connected than ever before and simultaneously more isolated. We have these wide but thin nets on social media, but nobody to truly lean on. In 1984, 1 in 10 people said they had no one with who they could talk to about important matters. 1 in 10. In 2004, the figure had jumped to 1 in 4. And the assumption is it's just gotten worse. And yeah, maybe we can't agree on a damn thing, but we've all had moments in which we've been treated less than. And we've all had a moment where people have thought, people don't listen to people like me. And we've all felt moments where we felt blamed and shamed, not for who we truly are, but for what we represent. It could be assumptions about being gay, or living in the country, not the city, or being Muslim, or being black, or having an accent, or being poor, or watching Fox. But when we shame others for membership of a group versus spending the time to get to know them, we actually start to reinforce that cycle of pain and polarization and loneliness. And let's get real for a second. My dad knows that you all think that you're better than him. That's okay, because he thinks that you're all a bunch of Yankees who pay too much for college and way too much in rent. You were smart enough to get a job, but you weren't smart enough to be able to get home for dinner every night. You're more concerned with political correctness than you are concerned with people really struggling to make ends meet. The shame and blame cycle only drives us further apart. So what is it actually going to take for us to break this, for us to move beyond this? And at Hollaback, we've actually been chewing on this for a while. This isn't a new question. These cycles of loneliness and isolation, it's been a part of our work from the beginning. And we've been training people on how to intervene when they see harassment happening, and then to tell those stories. In the past year, we've trained over 3,000 people to do that thing. We also launched HeartMob, where people can report their experiences of online harassment, and if they need help, ask for it from a community of vetted volunteers. And what we've discovered through this work, of doing this work for 12 years now, is that the core problem is a relationship problem. A relationship problem that's grounded, yes, in these long histories of racism and sexism and homophobia and classism, but a relationship problem nonetheless. And let's face it, relationships are really, really hard, even the good ones. The People's Supper has challenged every last piece of my being, as I've struggled, sometimes nervously, sometimes awkwardly, to figure out how to sit down next to somebody who doesn't believe that I deserve basic human rights, basic control over my body, basic protection from violence, and still to hold them in their full dignity, to fully see and hear who they are, to hear their story. It's real personal work. It's not the kind of thing that you can solve through policies. I don't do it for the sake of somehow merging my beliefs with theirs. Oh, hell no. I don't do it for the sake of tamping down my really righteous rage at what's happening in this country right now, except the elections yesterday. I was pretty stoked about that. I do it for the sake of seeing people as people, for the sake of being able to disrupt the cycle of shame and blame. Because here's the question that I'm holding. Can I actually ask somebody to hold me in my full dignity when I am unwilling to hold them in theirs? All in all, we've heard from folks in over 350 cities and towns. We've hosted over 750 dinners. Last week, I was at the Obama Summit, and I facilitated a dinner with Prince Harry, which was wild and awesome. Obama facilitated his own table. I could see the back of my head, arms reach away from me. I was like, oh my God. But I hope you'll host one too. Be cool like Obama. Host one. Prince Harry says it's awesome. But when everything hurts, my question too is this healing even possible? And I don't think healing is the right word for it. I don't think that's it. I think actually what we have to do is we have to grow. We did this research with Beth Livingston from Cornell University, and it showed that even as little as a knowing glance to somebody when they're being harassed can reduce trauma. Our research with Jill Diamond from Georgia Tech showed that by sharing your story, you bear witness to your pain and to others. And that actually moves your story from something that you're holding as something terrible that happened to you to something that is not totally about you. It's a little more about the messed up world that we live in. And we move things out from our fault into a more complex understanding of the way that the world has created a system that's unfair for us. We get inspired to take action. We get inspired to take care of people. We get inspired to fuel the resistance. The holidays are coming. Everybody's starting to ask, what are you doing? I'm going to spend the holidays with my dad, and I'm going to do what families do best. So at the People's Supper, we tell old stories, and we ask things like, what was the first time you understood the concept of citizenship? So Dad, why was our family so eager to escape that we were among the first to come through Jamestown? And at the People's Supper, we ask, what is a moment in which you've been treated as less than? So Dad, were you ever bullied for being treated? Bullied as a kid for being named Bland? My dad's name is truly Bland, like something that doesn't taste good, he says. At the People's Supper, we ask, when is a moment in which you felt truly seen and truly heard? My dad would have no understanding of this question. He would be like, what the hell are you talking about, Emily? So Dad, have you ever felt that the government listened to you? When? Why? One of my mentors recently reminded me that my dad is my greatest teacher. She said that if I can learn to hold my dad close, to allow space for that conflict and hurt and pain, then I will understand what it means to truly and deeply see somebody. I think our stories are a lot more complicated than our votes or our politics would have us believe. They can shape and reshape us, and in doing so, I think we can imagine the contours of our collective selves. The movement of our time isn't a movement against Donald Trump. It's a movement for each other. When love becomes an act of resistance, we can't give up. Thank you.